Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of The Niche Cast. We are from theniche-cage.com, where you can read about Aotearoa Warriors Rugby League. There's no Warriors footy this weekend. They have a bye, and I'm sure it's a beautiful bye round because it's pretty sunny here in Okalangi, Aotearoa, and they'll be enjoying the sunshine, which is good for them. But there is plenty of Aotearoa Warriors yarn and kōrero to be had. Did a fresh dive into styles and depth, as well as the winning footy notebooks from the last two rounds as well. So not a whole lot of Warriors chat on today's podcast because they do have a bye, but on our website, theniche-cage.com, you can read all about Aotearoa Warriors Rugby League. You can also read about Flying Kiwis football. You can also read about the All Whites. You can also read about the Breakers. You can also read about the Kiwi County Tour and many of the topics we are discussing today. You can read about them as well on our website, theniche-cage.com. Big up the Patreon whānau. The best way to support the Niche Cage is via Patreon, straight up the guts. Run it hard, run it straight to the patreon.com/our Niche Cage. And we do have an extra podcast there every week. I think those podcasts are going to get increasingly funky because we do love to talk a bit about Black Caps cricket, and it seems as though there has already been a lot of shenanigans and there's going to be plenty more shenanigans as far as Black Caps preparations for the ODI World Cup goes. With we've got Michael Bracewell injured, and that was the crux of our Patreon podcast, was talking about Black Caps squads and Black Caps player rankings, and now old Bracewell's injured. Beastie, he's got an Achilles rupture, I think. We will touch on that in this podcast, but that's where you can look forward to in the Patreon podcast every week. There's plenty of Black Caps chat, but we also just dive into any funky Kiwi sporting topics from the weekend. We record that to the variety show. It's a nice companion to the variety show, and it's there on the Patreon feed every week. And it's just the best way for readers, listeners, audience members to support the Niche Cage directly. You can join the Patreon whānau. You can also donate via Buy Me a Coffee. You can go on the website and just have a gaze. You can tell a friend. You can check us out, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, obviously YouTube as well, where we're popping off. So the Niche Cage is here. We're not covering all the bases. We're just doing our best, and that's what we do each and every day, to be honest. It's a daily hustle. Of course, tomorrow is a different day. Fair play. But a different day, Friday, it means it's our email newsletter coming out Friday evenings via Substack, thenichecage.substack.com. And that's where you can get everything Niche Cage sent straight to you. We do write specific yarns just for that email newsletter. As always, tomorrow probably be a deep dive into Kiwi-NRL team lists, lots of NRL notes, might even expand on some of this Black Cap stuff. Won't bother asking Nico the Wildcard what he's going to do unless he does have a certified plan, because he sucks at those teasers, as do I. But I can guarantee there's going to be some football. That I can be sure of for the Friday newsletter dispatch. But there's all sorts of miscellaneous Kiwi sporting bits and bobs written just for that email newsletter. Plus, there's links to all the things that we've written on our website, as well as links to all the podcast information as well. So you can sign up to that via Substack, thenichecage.substack.com. Otherwise, just big up yourself, love yourself. That's the mission, that's the objective, and we always like to embrace a bit of mindfulness to start our podcast.
Mindfulness today, coming in honor of the passing of Cormac McCarthy, who was probably, in my humble opinion, probably the greatest living novelist of well, I guess he's got to pass that torch along. I don't know who else comes up with that, but figured I had to come up with a Cormac McCarthy quote in respect to a great man, but that was a little bit harder than I thought it would be, because a lot of his novels are quite bleak and dark and a little bit not cynical, but I don't know, fatalistic. But ironically, the most fatalistic of all of his books is probably the book The Road, which was where I found a nice quote for it here. So this one goes, keep a little fire burning, however small, however hidden. Keep a little fire burning.
I'm just going to take that and keep it moving because you just got to keep a little fire burning. And I think it's quite self explanatory. Like, just keep that little fire burning.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if your fire, your fuego, the
There you
ahi,
go. Yeah.
if that decreases or diminishes. As long as you keep it burning, you're all good. Keep rocking and rolling, keep it moving and grooving. Let's get into some Aotearoa sport here. We do have a little period of Black Sticks hockey starting up. It's a European tour, which is part of the FIH Pro League. Pro League hockey is really important, and the Black Sticks are about to start basically a 2-week period in Europe where they will play Argentina, Belgium, Germany, and Netherlands. This is Black Sticks men and Black Sticks women playing some of the best teams in the world. And this is going to be a fascinating period for the Black Sticks because they, as I said on the variety show, both teams are struggling in the Pro League. The men are last. The women are 8th, second to last. Funnily enough, the men, Germany, Belgium, Argentina, and Netherlands are in spots ahead of New Zealand. They're not top 4, but they are 5 through to 8 in the women's competition. Argentina's first, Netherlands third, Belgium fourth, and Germany is 6th. So that lays out the challenge awaiting the women. They are playing top 6 teams over the next 2 weeks in the Pro League. The men, I don't think Netherlands being 5th, Argentina being 6th, Belgium being 7th, Germany being 8th, I don't think that's a fair reflection of their hockey and their standing as hockey nations. So I am curious how both Black Sticks teams perform over this next few weeks. This weekend specifically, it's 2 games against Argentina, then 2 games against Belgium, and then back for some more games against Argentina and Belgium before playing Germany. So big Belgium-Argentina focus this weekend for Black Sticks hockey. And as far as the squads go, there have been some changes. The European players, the players who play professionally in Europe, they are available, I believe. So you could say that the squads are stronger, bolstered by those players, but there were some players, some like certified Black Sticks, certified international players who were playing in the recent home series in Aotearoa that are not playing in Europe. So overall, I think it's just similar squads, not in terms of playing personnel, but in terms of strength and in terms of what they're capable of. I think they're similar squads, and I'm not overly positive about what they'll be able to do in Europe. But that sets the tone. Any wins here will be fantastic because these are really good hockey nations that the Black Sticks are playing against. But I don't think Kiwi hockey is that strong at the moment. And we've seen it already in the Pro League. As I said, the men are last, women are second to last. Women under Phil Burrows, they're not doing much. Like, they love to go backwards. They love to put themselves under pressure. The men just don't seem to have the talent of these other nations, and we've been documenting this a lot over the past 6 months or so, even recent Olympics and World Cups. This might be the demise of Kiwi hockey. And that's a grandiose, that's a bigger picture idea. However, it's being laid out. Like, last year was the first time neither team won a Commonwealth Games medal, for example. Neither team is doing much in the Pro League. Disappointing Olympic and World Cup campaigns, like a lack of world-class hockey players, not really inspiring a lot of hope and optimism for this European league, but we'll see what happens. And obviously got to check it out to see how they're playing and what they're doing and how the results look as well. I am curious. We will talk about the All Whites later on. Both Black Sticks teams, so we've got 2 Black Sticks teams. They're playing way more games than the All Whites. The All Whites are just playing 2 internationals. That's fantastic. I, given everything I said, who do you think is more likely to win a game? The All Whites, they are playing Sweden and Qatar. I am not overly positive that any of these Black Sticks teams could win a game. They might, I don't know how many games they're going to be playing, maybe eight or 10. I reckon there's a chance they might get 2 wins across both teams, across 10 games. How does that match up with your expectations or hope that the All Whites get a win over Sweden or Qatar?
Well, I don't expect them to win both those games. Don't really expect them to win either of those games, but I do think that Qatar is a little bit vulnerable. They're not playing in Qatar; they're playing in Austria for that game. The first game against Sweden is in Sweden, but the second game against Qatar is in Austria. Qatar have had a bit of a lead up with other fixtures for a couple of weeks now in camp, whereas the All Whites have only really had this week, so that's a factor. But they will have played Sweden before they play Qatar as well, so that's still a hit out. And Sweden have not a Nations League game, it's a European Championships qualifying game, I think actually against Austria straight after. So chances are the All Whites will catch the Swedish reserves rather than their top players, because their top players will obviously be prioritizing the game that matters, which is the qualifier, as opposed to the random friendly against New Zealand. So it's not impossible. I just don't know what to expect from the All Whites, particularly like it's another tour with an interim manager. So I don't know. The thing with some of what you're saying about the hockey stuff though is it feels like because I've had to write about the football ferns losing a lot of games, and generally a lot of it comes up against like, well, what did you expect kind of thing at the end of the day. It's like, well, you're playing against the USA, of course they're going to lose. You're playing against Portugal or whoever, it's Norway or Canada, or like, yeah, the New Zealand football team is probably going to lose against these countries. But I got the feeling from what you're saying about the hockey stuff, it's not like, yes, they're expected to lose against some of these top European teams in particular they're playing against, but it sounds like that's not maybe always been the case. Is that fair to say? Like they're not just come up against a wall because they can't get better because they're up against teams with bigger resources and more talent or whatever. It is also the case that they're slipping backwards. Is that what you're sort of alluding to there?
Yes. Although, like, New Zealand hockey resources are far lower than other nations.
Yeah.
But even then, like, Australia's hockey resource isn't fantastic, yet they are one of the best teams in the world consistently, even though no one in Australia really cares about their excellence. The most important nugget there is the Commonwealth Games, because not many of those European nations are in the Commonwealth Games. Commonwealth Games is New Zealand, England, Australia, India, which is different to cricket. Like, White Ferns went to the Commonwealth Games, and I think they might have won a medal, which for them is fantastic because, as we keep saying, the colonizer nations, they loved a bit of cricket. So all the colonizer nations were in the Commonwealth Games. Hockey is a bit more spread out with different nations around the world. But it was the first time that neither Black Sticks team has won a Commonwealth Games medal. So they were perennial medalists at the Commonwealth Games, which is a fairly solid effort. I'm not saying like they did have moments of winning, against good teams, outperforming expectations and outperforming their resources, but that's no longer the case for sure. And like the women's stuff, they've got a new coach, Phil Burrows. They're not playing entertaining hockey at all. And you look into like just the general stuff, there's not many world-class players. It's not invigorating. It's not exciting. It's just not entertaining. And they don't win many games. So it's just like it is a bit doom and gloomy, but I'm more curious to keep learning and to keep following what happens in Europe. There is that difference though. Both Black Sticks teams have had moments of performing on the world stage, and now they are slipping downwards. The Football Ferns have just been on a plateau of solid. Like they're just the solid women's football team in the
Yeah.
world. They're not going to
They're as
beat
good as they are, but they're no better than they are, sort of thing.
exactly, and they're but as we're seeing with football, as we're seeing with basketball, as we're seeing with rugby league, all those sports, even cricket, like all those sports are getting better. There are more talented players. There are the youngsters are the most talented players. There's world class players at the highest level. There's teams winning. There's different things happening just with the popularity of those sports. I don't see all that stuff in hockey, and it's also a very interesting theme to keep track of. You have been tracking the Breakers signings. Do you have like an update on some of the stuff that the Breakers have done rebuilding their roster?
Well, the crux of it is that rebuilding is the key word there. They are rebuilding the roster. There was hope that you make the championship series and the grand final, beaten in game like decisive game 5, wasn't it? You could maybe retain a lot of those players. So you keep most of the guys that you wanted. There was even hope that they might be able to retain their 3 import players, which would have been a unique thing because since the ownership changed with the Breakers, they have not retained a single import. And guess what? It sounds like they still haven't retained a single import. It doesn't look like any of the 3 guys are coming back, which is a little bit of a different story than past years, admittedly, because in this case it's more like the 3, like Brantley, Brown, Pardon, all played so well that now they can get bigger, more lucrative deals elsewhere. Brantley went and played on a 10-day contract for the Utah Jazz straight after the NBL season. Barry Brown Jr. right now is coming off the bench for Metropolitans 92 in France in the grand final series there, where he's playing alongside Victor Wembanyama. So he's doing okay there. He can probably get a lot more money in Europe than he can playing for the Breakers. That's understandable. Derek Pardon is playing in, I think, Puerto Rico, and hopefully got a playoff series coming up himself. I don't think it's playoff series. I think it might be one-off playoff games, but that's the case there. So they're going to have to get 3 new imports because basically they played beyond their they played themselves out of the Breakers salary range pretty much. So it's not a case of what they've had in the past where the imports sucked and there's no reason to keep them. It's more like the imports were good, therefore they can't keep them. So that was so it goes. Would have been nice to keep 1 or 2 of them, but it sounds like that's all 3 of them are out the door. Rob Lowe has retired. He was offered a new contract, but he's retired. Sam Timmins is not going to be re-signed. That was mentioned in an interview with Modi Mayor. They also, who else have we got there? They did re-sign Will McDowell White. So their number 1 domestic free agent managed to keep him around. Sweet as got Tom Abercrombie to sign on for 1 last season as well. Alec staying on as a DP. So they got some of the fellas back, but also Tom Vodanovic. As of yesterday, breaking news, Tom Vodanovic got an offer from a Philippine team for more money than he was getting at the Breakers, where, like, let's be honest, he was probably about 8th or 9th on the depth chart, so it would make sense. He might have been stepping up in the absence of Rob Lowe. It might have gotten him some more minutes there, but he might basically he might still get those minutes because he's going to go to Philippines. The Breakers have agreed to release him, but they've kept like the right of refusal. So when he finishes his season there, and I was trying to figure this out, but it seems like the Philippines have about 3 different seasons. So there's like 3 tournaments that go on, all of them league play leading into playoffs, which I don't know what the point of that is or what the idea is. But if he doesn't play all 3 of them, he could return for the latter stages of the NBL, and the Breakers would then have the right to pick him up before he can talk to any other team. So he might end up back with the Breakers later in the season. Should be cool because I'm sure he's got plenty to offer. But Vodanovic did actually play. He went and joined as like a replacement international player, a Filipino team just after the NBL season finished. Went over there, played 1 game. It was like a quarterfinal or something like this. So it was a playoff game. Played 45 minutes in that game. Scored 39 points with 13 rebounds. Hit about 6 3-pointers or something. But they lost, so they got eliminated. So he played 1 amazing game, and that was it. So, it makes, I don't know if he's going back to the same team because it hasn't been announced, but it would make sense that someone at least took notice of this dude who played 1 game and averaged 39 points. He's going back to the Philippines. And yeah, it sounds like, excluding obviously Ryan Repair is going to the NBA draft as well, so that's another one. Of the 12 players that they had on like full contracts, so not counting the DPs or the injury replacements, it sounds like 4 or 5 of them will be back, which is not a large portion. They're going to need to get 3 new imports, new big men. They've actually signed one already, Mangok Matiang. I mentioned him on the variety show, Aussie / South Sudanese big fellow who played 1 season for Illawarra, about 20 minutes of NBA basketball at the start of his career coming out of college, and mostly had a career in Europe. And it sounds like Vodanovic will be replaced by Dane Pino as well, who's a Southeast Melbourne Phoenix for the last few years. He had one really good season where he averaged about 8 and 8, and then he had some big injuries and missed most of the next season and the 2 seasons since then, playing off the bench. Relatively low rebounding numbers and scoring numbers. He is a very good rebounder. Both these 2 guys, neither of them are Rob Lowe shooting range, but they're both good defenders, great rebounders, and can score around the rim. So similar players. Also, both Australian veterans, though. So that's a bit of a when we had this whole thing last season about the Breakers getting back to the Kiwi core and all this, it does seem like they're maybe straying away from that a little bit. When I wrote about it, I did say like Modi Mayor has earned the benefit of the doubt with his recruitment. It goes like we can trust that he'll find some more good imports. We can trust that the guys he signed, even if they aren't the Kiwi lads, which is a bit disappointing as well, because like the big man position, we've talked about this a few times in the NBL, that's the most stacked position for domestic players in the Kiwi League. So it was sort of like, there might have been something else on offer there, but so it goes. I will give the benefit of the doubt to a coach who proved himself very much last season, but will say the Perth Wildcats currently have more contracted New Zealanders on their playing roster than the Breakers do. It's 5-4. So this spoils that sort of pipe dream I had of the Breakers and Wildcats playing a game in which at some point there were 10 New Zealanders on the floor. There is still at least one more local player spot for the Breakers, so hopefully they can find someone there. But yeah, it's a lot of rebuilding going on at the moment for that team, it seems.
It will be interesting, like, given the Breakers were successful last season and what we're seeing now with the Warriors, what we're going to see with the Wellington Phoenix, they have already moved towards development organizations. They have junior pipelines that produce talent that is cheaper than seasoned veterans from overseas, and they do a fantastic job at developing the youngsters from within. The Breakers were successful. Now it'll be interesting to see what happens if they do get away from that and how successful they will be. One dude who I suspect will be hunting Australian NBL opportunities as soon as possible, maybe with the Breakers, who knows? I'll be equally just as excited if it's with an Australian team. Is young Charlie Dalton for the Auckland Tuatara. And as you said on the variety show, Tuatara top of the table. There's a lot going on in that Tuatara team that is interesting and intriguing. I think Charlie Dalton and the emergence and the arise of Charlie Dalton is one of the major storylines from the Tuatara. Just quickly before you drop some more notes about the Tuatara, how far away do you think Dalton is from Australian NBL opportunities, given that there are other players of a similar ilk, similar age, similar talent, who are already in development spots with Australian teams?
Yeah, that's a really funky question because it is something, like you're saying about the hockey stuff, this is something that I've been following quite closely just to see how it unfolds, like to just sit back and see how this landscape kind of changes, because traditionally Charlie Dalton is like finishing high school or he's a year out of it or whatever. Traditionally he goes to college next and then he does 3 or 4 years at college in the States and then he comes back and tries to get onto an Aussie NBL roster or whatever. That's what traditionally happens. Dante Russo-Nance is about the same age as him, and instead of going to college, he's decided to sign a multi-year contract with the Perth Wildcats, where he'll be a DP at first, but moving into a senior spot, down the line, we've had this kind of like the Next Star program and in the NBL across the whole NBL. The Breakers have probably been the best at it of anyone. So the Breakers are a development club. It's just not always New Zealand players being developed. It's one American guy who didn't last that long, did great work with the French guys, in particular Repair, I think. But there is a nice trajectory there where it feels like, because I didn't mention as well, Mantas Rustavicius, something. Yeah, I'd have to look at. I can pronounce
Good
it when
effort.
I see it written down. Yeah, I can pronounce it when I see it written down, but I'm working from memory here. I remember it ends in Vicius because I remember thinking it sounds like Vinicius Junior, the Real Madrid player. So the Breakers have picked him up, and he's pretty much a very similar player in terms of, doesn't quite have I don't think, the wingspan of Ryan Repair, so maybe that limits his defensive stuff a bit, but offensively he is a better player than Repair was, and they're similar position, similar size, similar players basically. But Rupstavicius is like, or I could just call him the Mantis, or Mantis. Rupstavicius is like 2 or 3 years older. Like, he's about 21 now. He played under 20 European champs last year, which was sort of his big breakout. He's played professional ball in, I think it might be France. So I think it might be another French connection there, but he fits pretty much the same bill as Ryan Repair. And Ryan Repair was a step a lot. Like, you started with RJ Hampton, where it was very much about, fair play to him. He was just doing what he was told he could do, but it very much, his whole thing felt about, how do I get the best draft pick? How do I build my future, boost my career, kind of thing. The next couple of guys, Dieng and Bresson, they fitted into the team a little bit more and gave a bit more performance, but also were still young guys who had, in particular, defensive lapses that meant they weren't always able to stick around on the court. Repair was the best defender of those guys, and it felt like there's another step towards that balance between players' development and team performance. And now it feels like Rupstavicius will be the next step along that. Like, every time they've got a little bit more favorable towards the team perspective with their next stars. Would be lovely if they added in Charlie Dalton as a DP. Like, this seems like that could be a thing to be done. Because he might very well want to follow that pathway, because we have seen the NBL is producing NBA players. They're doing that. Like, some of the ones with big international sort of scouting reputations will probably make the NBA anyway, no matter where they played. I certainly think that's been the case with the guys that Breakers have had, but it's not just that. Like, Xavier Cooks is another example of a guy who just played really well in the NBL for a few years until he finally got an NBA chance. Like, you can do that. You don't have to go the college route anymore. So that's something I'm paying close attention to see how much that swings back in the other favor, because it does feel like that for someone like a Charlie Dalton, that feels like a pathway where if the Breakers offered him a DP deal, suddenly that's a better way of progressing your career than going to college. It just feels like that might be something. But, and the Breakers used one DP out of the possible 3 last year. You have to have at least one. They had Alex McNaught. You're allowed up to 3 though, so they could easily just add more. That's the thing that can be done. So yeah, we'll see how that goes, because whether it's someone like Dalton or there's other guys who can fit that bill as well, would be nice to see them using those spots. And again, like, to your point as well, Russo Naz is a good example of this. Doesn't have to be the Breakers. All the Australian teams are paying close attention to these things as well. So we'll see.
Sounds like you're talking yourself into Charlie Dalton being an NBA prospect, which is...
Yeah, I know that's not that's the ceiling. Yeah,
right,
that's
right.
not the expectation.
But you were describing how NBL basketball, Australian NBL basketball, might be a more lucrative option financially and development than going to college and pursuing that trajectory in America. But stay with Charlie Dalton and the Tuatara. So we've talked a lot about Charlie Dalton. What is it that he's doing for the Tuatara that is so impressive? Like, why have I brought up Charlie Dalton? Why are you pondering such a future for Charlie Dalton, specifically with what he's doing in the Tuatara and how he fits into a winning Tuatara team?
Well, he does stuff. he doesn't just hang out on the court and get the empty minutes kind of thing. He will chip in with 10 to 15 points some nights. He can shoot, and he will become a better shooter as he gets a bit older. He seems to be a very sort of well-rounded basketballer. But like most of all, I think it's less about trying to evaluate him as a player and more just looking at the point that he is 18 or 19 years old and he is a regular starter for the best team in the NBL. Like this is the team, Tuatara team on a 6-game win streak. They've gone top of the table. He's starting alongside NBL veterans, all of them. Rob Lowe, Ruben Tarangi, Jared Weeks, and Cam Glidden. All of them have played copious levels of Australian NBL basketball. And he's effectively a rookie. At least this is his breakout season anyway. Starting alongside those guys, getting minutes, and it might last. Like we'll see. They've got a American fella sitting on the bench at the moment, so that might he's only just come in. Cruz Perra Hunt as well, another good top Kiwi prospect coming out of college this time rather than potentially going in. That's the other thing is these guys get out of college and they can still come and get every year. There's one or two, and this year there's actually been 2 or 3, I think, with the potential of maybe a couple more with those DP spots, getting contracts in the Aussie NBL. And another Breakers / Kiwi player development little, whisper there is that those guys don't go to the Breakers. They did get Yanni Wetzel the second contract. Like he went to Southeast Melbourne Phoenix and then they signed him a year later. So that's maybe the target for the Breakers being like, and this might be a very deliberate strategy too, being like, well, we don't sign them out of college when we don't quite know what they're going to be, but we know that as the New Zealand team, we have a recruitment power to be able to bring the best of these guys back. But they didn't sign Yanni Wetzel, they didn't sign Jack Salt when he came out, which didn't, he's now retired because of injuries, but they didn't sign him when he was an NCAA champion coming out of college basketball. They didn't sign Sam Wardenberg. They didn't sign Sam Menenga this season, Flynn Cameron this season as well. Dante Russo-Nance isn't quite in the same ballpark because he's pre-college rather than post-college, but they didn't get him either. There is a little bit of that with the Breakers, but more to the point with the Tuatara. Like, in fact, you know what is few of these guys, like Dante Russo-Nance played for the Tuatara. Last year, I think, and like Tucky Farrington played for them last year and has sort of been playing some German basketball overseas. Like who else? We were talking about this before. Who else did they have? What was the other one?
Liafa.
Isaiah Liafa, yeah, who is now a Breaker, but again, didn't sign with the Breakers initially, went to Southeast Melbourne, and then they got him after that. So I think maybe this is actually quite a deliberate strategy from the Breakers of being like, we don't necessarily sign the Kiwi prospects on the way up, but when they prove themselves, we know we can bring them back, sort of thing. Like that's the mentality, which honestly, like, as long as they keep doing that, I kind of don't hate it. Like you can do both, but I certainly think that's something, because frankly, that is what the Warriors have done as well, isn't it? There's seeing guys like, Toru Harris didn't come up at the Warriors. He came at the Melbourne Storm, and then they brought him back, kind of thing. I don't know, Marata Niokore and Tamari Martin as recent signings probably fit that bill as well. Even though he started at the Warriors, Chance Nickel-Klokstad could may have got a NRL break at the Warriors, but he went to further peak at the Raiders before coming back. So maybe that's just a strategy. I don't know. I guess that means the Phoenix should be targeting Storm Rue and James McGarry next. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, like where do we start with this point? Where should I be taking this?
Well, I'd add that like Tuatara and Franklin Bulls are the most connected to the Breakers. So if we are pondering Charlie Dalton, he is in that kind of like Tuatara there, North Shore, Auckland based. So he's in that North Shore kind of Breakers hub area that is a potent basketballing area in Aotearoa. So he is front and center for the Breakers recruitment staff, if they have any recruitment staff in Aotearoa, because they don't seem to love Aotearoa basketballers. Just a quick question: who's your favorite player from the past week or so of NBL basketball outside the Tuatara?
Well, I got a good one for this. That would be, and I need to look up the box scores so I can get this right. But that would be Cal McRae playing for who was it? It was Nelson,
Oh,
wasn't it?
there was a big man
Or
for
was it?
Otago. They had the Twin
Um,
Towers, McRae and Timmins, I think it might have been.
Let me just check the old.
But there was a big man for Nelson. I do remember that. Not old Dempster. Dempster's a hearty old bugger. Like he's a good old Kiwi NBL tail, Mister Dempster. I think it's Sam Dempster.
Yep, Sam Dempster. That's
He's
the
an
one.
absolute trooper.
Yeah, he's one of those guys who is like the veterans of the league who you always need a few of those fellas hanging around. Yeah, Callum McRae, 26 points for Nelson. He's like he's he's tall. He's like 7 foot, 7 foot 1. He's huge, but he's not just huge like vertically. He's also just looks like an absolute unit. Like looks like you could chuck him on an NRL park. He had a fantastic debut there. Like he's been doing college. I think he is still at college. I think he's at where are we? It says UC Riverside last year. I assume he's still there. He's from Palmerston North originally, but he's playing for Nelson, which I think is well. The thing with the guys popping up all around the country is that you've got coaches all around the country who've worked with everyone at like various other teams and age grade levels and whatever. But yeah, Callum McRae, 26 points and a bunch of rebounds. I can't remember what he got there. Uh, 26 and 8, shot 11 of 14, 3 assists as well. Hell of a way to announce yourself in your first game of the thing. And it was one that came a little bit out of the blue, but there have been a lot of these kind of sneaky signings midway through the season. And I think that is something that the Nelson Giants kind of lacked. And now they have it. So they beat the Canterbury Rams in that game as well. That was a bit of an upset. So a big sort of South Island derby result there.
That was the
We'll see if they can get on a bit of a run.
that was the Max Darling hometown return.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I do remember that one.
He did score 19 points, so Max Starling had a bit of a day as well.
Yeah, my memory must have been jaded from too many vitamins because I was thinking Otago, they kept going to Sam Timmins, and he was an absolute monster. He should be playing NBL a lot more, I reckon, as well, because he's like a go-to focal point of the Otago Nuggets attack.
Well, I wonder if he will, because the Breakers have pretty much said they're not re-signing him, but that means he's now open to other teams to have a little scoop. And he's big, he's tall, he gets rebounds. We shall see.
The latest round of county championship cricket has been wrapped up. We had Will Williams took a few wickets, as he tends to do. Daryl Mitchell took a few wickets, as he tends to do. 2 wickets in the second innings for Lancashire, but he also had 68 runs. I think that was in Lancashire's first innings. Some glorious Daryl Mitchell strokes that you can check out on our Twitter, Instagram, or the YouTube shorts as well. Really loved the Daryl Mitchell down the ground. I think any Kiwi cricket fan is going to be well acquainted with Daryl Mitchell going down the ground. We also had runs from Tom Latham. He scored 3 runs in the first innings for Surrey against Kent. Then he scored 57 runs in the second innings. Matt Quinn took 3 wickets as well. Matt Quinn and Will Williams, they are the regular Kiwi County Tour troopers, so big up to them. Not much doing for Matt Henry or Ajaz Patel. My notes here have 1 wicket for Matt Henry. So Matt Henry and Ajaz Patel combined for 1 wicket. Interesting to see what happens there moving forward. Ajaz Patel was bowling a lot of overs, a lot of economical overs, so he was playing his role. He just didn't have any wickets, and Matt Henry usually takes wickets, but he didn't take wickets, and he definitely didn't score any runs either, which Matt Henry has been doing a lot of in the Kiwi County Tour this winter. Henry Shipley, he started with 41 runs. Then he took 3 wickets. Then he hit 28 not out at a strike rate of 175. Going to be looking for those highlights just to show a bit of Henry Shipley razzle-dazzle with the bat. But he scored 41 and 28, so he's doing all right. Seems pretty stock standard there as far as Black Caps implications. Daryl Mitchell and Tom Latham, pure class. Bit of a return to normality for Matt Henry. As we discussed on the Patreon podcast, Henry Shipley is someone Kiwi cricket fans need to keep an eye on, because he is a nice example of why the Black Caps New Zealand cricket contracts mean nothing to fans. Said all this in the Patreon podcast, so I'll just regurgitate it here. Apologies to the Patreon fan if you already heard this yarn, but all the headlines around Black Caps contracts were about Adam Milne returning to the contracted list, first time 5 years, all this crazy stuff. Henry Shipley has played more ODI cricket this year than Adam Milne. Henry Shipley is going to be a more important bowler than Adam Milne moving forward. And part of that discussion was Rachin Ravindra and his importance to the Black Caps moving forward, which has increased now that Michael Bracewell has suffered an injury. This is a bummer. I think this is a bit of a stink one, and there's a bit of a vibe going on here. Not a good vibe, bit of a funky pooey vibe with the injuries the Black Caps are suffering ahead of this World Cup. No Kane Williamson. No Michael Bracewell. Michael Bracewell was being developed as a key figure for the Black Caps. He can bowl 10 overs a spin, very powerful lower order hitter as well. My first 11 included Mitchell Santner, Michael Bracewell, Ish Sodhi, Trent Boult, Tim Southey, and Matt Henry. I was willing to pick all 6 of those lads in a first 11. Now Bracewell's out injured, and I don't think the Black Caps have another spinner who can step into a first 11 role, but they do have the likes of Cole McConchie and Rachin Ravindra who can become squad members. Some of the media coverage around Bracewell's injury did mention Mark Chapman is a powerful hitter. So I don't have Mark Chapman in my top 15 for the World Cup. And I was curious to see him mentioned alongside Glenn Phillips, because I don't see much of a comparison there. But Mark Chapman's doing his thing. He might be in the World Cup squad. But what's the most important implication you see around Bracewell's injury for the Black Caps? Just tying it back into the Kiwi County Tour, there's no one on the Kiwi County Tour right now who is relevant to this discussion. So we can kind of just park the Kiwi County Tour to the side and just get your major takeaways from Michael Bracewell being injured for the World Cup.
Yeah, it's not a good development. I did see it mentioned in the thing about how he was the ODI Player of the Year for the Black Caps, which I thought was nice, because I didn't realize that, because those awards mean increasingly less when you actually don't play very much ODI cricket, let alone with your top team involved.
Well, how about this one? How about this one? Things that mean the least to Kiwi cricket fans. Number 1, Black Caps contracts. Number 2, number 1, New Zealand cricket contracts. Number 2, New Zealand cricket awards.
Yeah. I mean, I think the overall cricketer of the year or whatever, I can't remember how they do it, so I guess it doesn't mean that much if I don't actually know. But I think the overall thing is valuable. I think when you start breaking into format by format, when some of those formats have not had very much focus over the last couple of years, the ODIs in particular just hasn't been touched, really. I mean, a lot of that work was because he scored a beautiful 100 against Ireland, and I think there might have been a big score against like Scotland or whatever. But Michael Bracewell, regardless of that, had established himself as the dude who was going to bat in 6 or 7 or whatever it was going to be, the big hitter. And that's where I guess a big hitter who also can bowl some overs is the important thing. And I think they can find some other guys who, like, they've got other. Rachin Ravindra seems like an obvious example. If you want that to be a spinner, if you don't care about it being a spinner, Jimmy Neesham comes back into the mix all of a sudden. Mark Chapman, maybe, if you're thinking we don't want Neesham because we didn't give him a temporary contract, so that might be a factor. But like, if it's not Neesham for whatever reason, then maybe someone like Mark Chapman. comes into the mix just because he can hit the ball hard and a long way, it might be the case that Glenn Phillips has to change his role a little bit, because I think they really quite specifically, and I agree with this entirely as well. I think you need someone who you're going to say, even if it's a slightly floating position in the batting order, you just need someone who you're going to say, first wicket we lose inside the last 10 overs, this guy comes in. Like, and it's been Jimmy Neesham in the past, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's him again. It was going to be Michael Bracewell. It's not just a good batter in that position. It's someone who can score at a straight over 200 when things really click for them. Like someone who can just come in and smash it, but smash it to a point where you trust that they're not just going to get out first ball, being silly with it. You know, someone who's a genuine batter and also clears the boundaries regularly. It's hard to find someone else who does that and fits that all-rounder bill. That's quite a tricky development now for the Black Caps, because, like I say, it might be Will Young comes into the order and Glenn Phillips gets asked to do that role. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It might be Jimmy Neesham just comes straight back in, but it's something they have to figure out now. Whereas they've spent 2 years prepping Michael Bracewell for this specific position, and then he gets injured.
That's the case against Rachin Ravindra, because Rachin Ravindra hasn't. I don't think he's a really good top order T20 batter, but I don't think he's I don't think he is a reliable.
He's not destructive.
He's not destructive, but he's also a young lad trying to get into a World Cup where he will be required to score 60 off 30 in an ODI semi-final type of situation.
Yeah.
That's where I'm intrigued about the Cole McConchie reliability, the trustworthiness that they seem to see in Michael Bracewell. Like Cole McConchie, there isn't a lot of difference in the work that Cole McConchie and Michael Bracewell did in the Super Smash. And to be honest, across all formats in domestic cricket. It seems crazy to say now because Michael Bracewell is a certified cricketer. He's getting opportunities around the world. He's playing a lot of Black Caps cricket. Cole McConchie is not. But at the time of Michael Bracewell's selection, that might have come after Cole McConchie had already played cricket in Bangladesh for a random tour. But also Cole McConchie has had Super Smash moments. He's had Ford Trophy moments, Plunkett Shield moments. He has done the same stuff as Michael Bracewell in domestic cricket. But he wasn't,
including with the ball.
Like, he's a fair spinning option. Bowls the same off spin as Michael Bracewell. So that might be something to keep an eye on. But then you've got to go a step further. Jimmy Neesham, even Mark Chapman, they are international cricketers. So it's like, I don't have a whole lot of trust in Rachin Ravindra for a big pressure moment. I've got a little bit more faith and trust in Cole McConchie doing that role. I've got more faith and trust in Mark Chapman than Cole McConchie. Not spin bowling, but in that kind of hitting role. But Jimmy Neesham is the most trustworthy slugger for the Black Caps. However, Michael Bracewell was being groomed as a legit all-rounder. That's where things get messy. That's where things get complicated. Because of his all-round skill set and what he can do with the bat, what he can do with the ball. Although we love to have a laugh about the bowlers being selected for their batting, but these bowlers can all bat. Bowlers can all whack boundaries, and they're doing some things. So I'll just promote Matt Henry up to number 6, and we'll just call it a day there because he's whacking it in the county championship. Let's just talk a little bit about NRL footy here. We don't have Warriors. They have a bye. However, we do have the New South Wales Cup Warriors. They are facing Newtown Jets, and this is really interesting because it's their 3rd game in a row in Australia. They played in Sydney against the Rabbitohs. They played in Canberra against the Raiders, and this weekend they are in Sydney against the Newtown Jets, who are affiliated with the Sharks. There's the fact that there's no NRL game makes this a really interesting game for the New South Wales Cup Warriors, because like when the reserve graders are playing in a different country to the NRL team, it makes it really tricky to get the overlap between the squads. So if Tane Tuaupiki is 18th man for the NRL team, It's really tricky to get them a game for the reserve graders if they are in a different state, let alone a country. But now there's no NRL game. Taintua Piki's at fullback, Volkman's in the halves. Maiu'u and Vagana, starting props, Laban, Halasima are there. There's also Solomon Vasuvulangi, who is a big bopper. Like, not just a big bopper, he is a big bopper. Like, he's a massive dude. And what I wrote in the Warriors style and depth guide this morning was, there's always, you see any interviewer with the Warriors on some of these other sites and whatnot, there's a lot of questions about signing a prop. Well, the reserve grade team has 2 young props, Zion Maiu'u and Isaiah Vagana. Solomon Vasuvalangi is massive, right? Like, there are some Halasima, as we keep saying every week, he's still at school. And he might be one of the best youngsters in New South Wales Cup. I don't see the need to sign anyone. Like, the Warriors are a development club, and they might sign someone because you always want more solid NRL pros. But my point is that there is a lot of depth, and there's a lot of developing depth, growing depth, emerging depth in what the Warriors are doing. Jacob Laban's there, Halasima's there, and Tanistowers Smith is there, all SG ball players now playing New South Wales Cup. And most of that is happening in the forward pack. There's no outside backs who have played SG ball and New South Wales Cup this season. Even Etuati Fukafuka, he's a hooker. So all the players who have gone from SG ball to New South Wales Cup are forwards. And those forwards, especially Maiu'u, Halasima, Laban, they're going to be pushing for NRL footy next season. And just intrigued what they do against the Newtown Jets, because the Newtown Jets are second, the Warriors are fifth. And that makes it a really interesting game for the New South Wales Cup Warriors. As far as Kiwi-NRL footy goes this weekend, there are some interesting positional moves. We have Joey Manu moving back to fullback after not really doing the business in the halves. And part of the Roosters shuffle, they've brought in Nofahu White to start at lock. He played a lot of footy earlier in the season, dropped out because some of those veteran players came back. They couldn't get the job done. Now Nofahu White is in the mix as starting lock. I think he's a Bay Roskell junior, so it's good to see him starting alongside Satili Tupouniua, because Satili Tupouniua and Nofahu White were both recruited as youngsters from Auckland who have come up through the Roosters system. The one and only Dejan Arce, he is now starting halfback for the Parramatta Eels. Fabulous. Also, moving to the halves, we have Stafford Toa. He's number 6 for the West Tigers. And for a lot of Australian NRL fans, they'll be like, what's doing here? Stafford Toa, you know, he was playing wing. He was playing centre. He's just an outside back. He just does that job. Stafford Toa was one of the best youngsters coming out of Aotearoa. He was a bit of a phenom at St. Paul's College, coming out of Mount Wellington Warriors, made all the rep teams. He is an elite Kiwi-NRL junior. He made the New Zealand schoolboys one year, then he made the Australian schoolboys the next year. That is Stafford Toa, and he has the talent and the pedigree to play halves in the NRL, I believe. And I'm obviously curious how that looks playing alongside Brandon Wakeham. And I think that's it for the positional battles. Positional changes, sorry. Hayes Perham, love his work at fullback for the Bulldogs. You've still got Braden Hamlin-Uele in the Sharks forward pack as well. And speaking of moving positions, Asafa Solomona, he's back at starting prop this weekend for the Storm against Stafford Toa and the Tigers after playing edge forward last week. But also, I love Alec MacDonald. I've talked a lot about him this year. He's from Auckland. I think he's half Pākehā, half Palangi. And he is a quintessential Melbourne Storm forward. He's been out injured, I think, for a few weeks, but he comes straight back in on the bench for the Melbourne Storm. That's because he is hard mahi. He's a grinder, Alec McDonald. He's not massive. He's not like, he doesn't ooze NRL tangibles like size or mobility or X factor, offload. Like, he's just the Melbourne Storm forward, does all the hard stuff and gets the job done. So it's good to see him back on the bench for the Melbourne Storm.
Yeah, I was having a look at some of these squads as you're saying that, and the one that stuck out was that Roosters gig because, of course, they've got the old you've got the old origin period coming up, so there's a couple of guys missing there, and one of them, of course, is James Tedesco, which means that Joey Manu, having had his bit of a, I wouldn't say experiment because he's done well in the halves in the past, but it's just the team where they are at the moment, that wasn't quite working for him, and now he gets to move back to fullback. And of course, he's like, is the funny thing about him playing in the halves is it's like, yeah, he's a pretty good half, but he's also like world class in two other positions, and he can play halves to a decent thing. Like that's a we haven't got a word for it yet, but that's a for lack of a better word, that's a baller right there, you know.
He's a gamer.
I noticed he's a gamer. He's a gamer. I noticed Brandon Smith's still out injured, but they have two other guys called Smith, including a dude starting in the halves called Sandon Smith. So that's gonna be that's gonna be confusing if you got Brandon Smith and Sandon Smith both playing at the same time someday. But the question I have for you, in reference to some of our earlier conversations, it is the Knights against the Roosters. Joey Manu's moved back to fullback. Who's a better fullback, Kalen Ponga or Joey Manu?
I can't say Joey Manu right now because he hasn't
played there since the last internationals.
Yeah, he hasn't done a whole lot of fullback. Fair play to Kalen Ponga. He's not better than Dylan Brown at number 6. I'd like to see that situation resolved, but he is better than a lot of fullbacks at fullback. Like, Kalen Ponga's best position is fullback. My whole bit there was that, why are you putting Kalen Ponga at number 6? You know, like, he is a fullback and he should be playing fullback. Joey, like, the interesting thing here is Joey Manu a better fullback than Shans Nickel-Krukstad? Because when it comes to Aotearoa Kiwis time, quite often it's been Nickel-Krukstad playing centre and Joey Manu at fullback. If Joey Manu hasn't been playing fullback all season for the Roosters and it's time for Aotearoa Kiwis Rugby League, even I can't select Joey Manu at fullback ahead of Nickel-Krukstad, given what's happened this season. But what happens when Joey Manu plays fullback is he is ridiculous. So if he's playing a few games at fullback, then it changes that paradigm, because he's just straight up one of the best runners of a rugby ball in the world in any code. And, like, I don't think he certainly wasn't playing his best footy in the halves. However, the Roosters were losing before he was in the halves. The Roosters' problems go far greater than Joey Manu as a half. So I don't think, like, the Roosters weren't stinking up the joint because of Joey Manu in the halves. But I think they're going to be better with him at fullback, because that's just better suited to Joey Manu. But you can't select Joey Manu at fullback ahead of James Tedesco. So it's a bit of a conundrum. It's a bit of a situation. All Joey Manu can do is play his best footy at fullback and make it an interesting dilemma, because, like, I'd also suggest that Joey Manu is a far better centre than these other Jerrys that the Roosters have, Corey Allen and Billy Smith. Like, why would you put Joey Manu in the halves just so you can get Corey Allen and Billy Smith into the centres? Just chuck Joey Manu.
When you got Sandon Smith out there and waiting to go halfback.
Yeah. Like, just chuck Joey Manu at centre and let him float around. That seems better use for his ability. But obviously, themes of most podcasts will keep learning, because maybe Joey Manu outperforms Kalen Ponga in this particular game. There's also, like, this is, now that you've put the spotlight on this game, you've got Leo Thompson versus Nofahu White in the middle.
Hey.
It's going to be like, I think Daniel Saifiti, yeah, you've got both Saifiti brothers. They'll be going at it with Wairea Hargraves. But then you've got youngster Leo Thompson from Hawke's Bay coming up against Nofahu White in the middle, and that's going to be really interesting as well. because Leo Thompson just plays NRL footy every single week. He's pretty similar now to Jordan Ricky. Jordan Ricky's done it for 3 or 4 seasons, and that's a mark of his quality, just the consistent level of NRL performance. That's what Leo Thompson's done. He moved to the Knights ahead of last season, played round 1. You're also seeing it with Will Warbrick. Like, he is glued onto the wing for the Melbourne Storm. That's his ability, that's his talent, and that's where he should be. Which is very different to this Eels group. Dejan Arce, he's been kind of floating around the system. Bailey Simonson got opportunities on the wing, and he's now impressing at centre. I've been talking all season about Ofahiki Ogden, Makahisi Makatoa, trying to get them more game time. So I'm curious what happens there. I don't know what connection that has to the Knights Roosters game, but I am curious about the Eels as well, especially with Dejan Arce from Christchurch in the halves.
And that Eels game is straight after the Knights Roosters as well. Yeah, so
there you go.
If someone wants to listen for the long haul, there's also Tigers Storm straight after that. Triple header on Saturday. Plenty going on even without the Warriors playing.
Tigers Storm, that's got 2 Kiwi-NRL halves in it. Stafford Toa and Jerome Hughes. Also got 2 Kiwi-NRL centre wing combinations, because you got William Warbrick and Remus Smith, who wants to play for the Aotearoa Kiwis. Tigers have Asu Kepaoa and Junior Tupou, who are both from Auckland. So I could go on. I could go on and on about the Kiwi-NRL funk, but we probably need to chat about some All Whites footy, because you think they can win one of these games. You don't think they're going to defeat Sweden in Sweden, but you reckon they might be able to defeat Qatar in Austria, Vienna. I imagine Qatar is having a bit of a hangover from their World Cup. Like, it seems like everything would have been built up for that World Cup, and now they're just kind of chilling. Like, yeah, don't think they have the situation of like losing funding or, high performance Qatar dropping their funding or anything, but
they also sucked at the World Cup.
Yeah, well, there you go. They
didn't do anything, and they had a decade to prepare for it from when they got that very controversial vote in their favor. Didn't do anything. Like 10 years to bring over as many Brazilians as you could, and naturalize them as citizens. They just didn't happen for them. So, and then this is like an opportunity to play 6 months later. So where are they going to be, like, straight after this 10-year World Cup cycle that they had, which they still failed at, and now we're getting them 6 months into the next cycle? There's I'm not saying I have expectations of them winning that game. I just think it's possible.
Well, I'll go a step further. I would love to see the All Whites absolutely destroy the Qatar football team, put a score on them, and just shake up the footballing world. It won't shake up the footballing world, but it feels like, like Qatar were at the World Cup. They think they're the big Donnies of football. Nah, Aotearoa is out here. I don't know where you want to start your little yarn here. It's like, it's not a mix and match squad. It seems like a pretty settled All White squad, but are we still in an interim coaching? Yeah, interim All Whites coach Darren Baisley is in charge. But even then, the All Whites were playing games against China a few months ago, and Baisley was in charge there as well. Let's start there. What are you looking to build upon from the last time we saw All Whites Rugby League? Because these international games, it's like, international cricket a few years ago. There's not much context around international friendly type of games for football. So how are you, what are you looking for as far as building from the last time we saw the All Whites?
Well, we do still have that interim coach situation, so that takes away some of it, because if you had a permanent coach in place, you could say, building tactics, building combinations, building these things so that they're ready to go when they come up in serious football games down the line. But I do think these are sneaky important fixtures because one of the issues that they had in the last World Cup cycle, and it was sort of brought upon them by the fact they didn't have that much time to get around to it after the pandemic stuff, and there were travel limitations and whatever. But a lot of their friendly games leading up to the, at least leading up to the Oceania qualifying, were against teams that were around them in the rankings, and mostly games that they sort of felt like we're probably ranked below where we should be, largely because they don't play enough games against enough good teams. So they continue to play more games against teams that aren't as good, and then you get some good results in there. But it also, I think, when they came up against Costa Rica in particular in the Intercontinental playoff, which cost them their place at the World Cup, but they couldn't quite get it done. I think one of the big issues they had, the main one was just the inexperience and whatever. But I think part of that inexperience is not just you having young players, it's also this team had not really played against a team that was considerably better than them at any point. Like they had games that were scheduled during the pandemic. They were going to play England at Wembley at one point. They were going to play Belgium at one point. These games didn't happen. It's like they would have probably gone and got thrashed in those games. But it's kind of like it's kind of like when a baseball hitter's getting ready to come up to bat next, and they put the weights on their bat and do a few swings so that when they take the weights off, everything swings a bit smoother. It's like the All Whites hadn't. Their Costa Rica game was a step up, whereas if they'd had a better preparation, it might not have been a step up. It might have been a level they were more used to, and could have been more sort of could have capitalized upon more. So I think just getting games against a country like Sweden, and Qatar is just a bit of a throw in alongside them. The right type of games for them to be playing at this point. With it's early World Cup cycle where there's nothing major on the line yet. Get some reps in against good teams. See where the standard is at international footy against what's probably going to be a rotated Sweden side for reasons discussed at the start of the podcast, but that's fine. That's fine for us. Sweden's second 11 is still going to be pretty good. There's still going to be players who have played like Champions League and stuff like that, and there's still going to be guys who have won league titles. And actually, we'll have a Champions League player in our group and a couple of league title winners as well. So that's we're slowly catching up to some of these teams, but yeah, it's a nice little gauge of where the All Whites are at now. But I think more importantly, it's the boost for where they will be in a couple of years' time. It's just to get in nice and early with games like this and raise the standard what this team is used to. Because we've seen enough of these guys playing together now, including a lot of these combinations floated the Olympics and the under-23s, and even at the under-20 World Cup in 2019, a lot of the same guys were playing there. So combination there. This is an existing thing. It's an ongoing sort of development with these guys and playing together and whatnot. But they just need to translate that to a higher level, and getting games like this is how that happens.
Do you expect Finn Sherman to start one of these games?
No, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play. I think with him, it's a bit more about just get him in the environment, get a young defender in there to sort of like just to get someone a bit of experience around the group, because they do have a lot of older defenders as well, and you sort of want to at least be thinking a few years down the line as well with someone like him. But it's certainly possible he might pop up off the bench in one of these games. Get a debut there. He'd earn it. He was one of the key performers at the Under-20 World Cup. He captained that team, working with Darren Bazley, who coached that side as well. So he's got a bit of momentum to him at the moment. He's been playing some good footy. So he'd deserve it if it happens for him. But yeah, I wouldn't gamble on it. There are a lot of centre backs in that squad is one of the aspects of it. Probably more than they need, but that's always the case with New Zealand football teams.
Yeah, I got my Wellington Phoenix centre backs and All White centre backs mixed up there. So Finn Sermon, he's straight in there for the Wellington Phoenix. Maybe he's not straight in there for the All Whites. But from your Flying Kiwis perch, who's the hottest All White right now? Like who's the dude coming into this series with sizzling form from their Flying Kiwis mahi?
Sizzling form. I almost have to think about that a little bit, because a few of these guys are not coming in a sizzling form. Even key players like Joe Bell has hardly played for the last couple of months. He fell out of favour at his club. Kakache has been mostly backup all season, although a couple of strong performances at the very end of the season gives him a little bit of momentum. Probably someone like I mean, Marko Stamenic as well had about 6 months during the season where he didn't play at all, but he also did come back into contention at the end of the season and played relatively a small but still crucial role in them and FC Copenhagen winning a league and a cup double. So he's certainly got the high performance level of that. It's not so much as sustained, I guess. Oh, the A League's been off for a while, so can't really name them. Maybe. I mean, I'll put it this way. I think one aspect of this team that I'm certainly going to be paying some attention to is the goalkeeping faction, because you do have two goalkeepers who haven't been with the squad for quite a while. Both have been capped, both have played before, Nick Sarnev and Max Crocombe, but haven't been picked in all white squads for several years. He's about 3 for Sarnev and I think about 5 for Crocombe. Ollie Saylor has established himself as the number one. He's the guy. Michael Vald's been around the squad a bit, but he's not playing hardly at all and actually got injured when he finally did get a game. Had to go off injured. He first game of the season in Japan and he doesn't even last the 90, which is unfortunate. And Stefan Marinovic doesn't even have a club. He got released from his Israeli team in January and hasn't signed anywhere else yet, probably waiting for the next season to start rather than midway through. But you can't pick those guys because they're barely playing. Sarnev and Crocombe have been in very good form. They're in there. Like they've got their recalls. And Sale just wasn't as good for the Phoenix. Certainly wasn't as consistent for the Phoenix last season as he had been in the year before that, and especially the year before that. I just wonder, I wonder if they might rotate the goalkeepers a little bit and give at least two different keepers a start in each game. And B, I just wonder if that first choice goalkeeping thing is a little more vulnerable than it might have felt, because Sale has only played about 8 games or something for the All Whites. It's not like he's been locked on for several years. It's not like it's been his jersey to lose for a long time, And I think Max Crocombe in particular had a very good season. I think Nick Sarnev had a very good season as well, actually. And both of them are potentially on the move. Crocombe definitely on the move. Sarnev potentially on the move. They've been playing in League Two, but as I say, like good chance that both of them end up at a higher level next season. I'm curious how that looks, because I think Crocombe in particular could definitely give Ollie Sayle a bit of a run for his money in these games.
I was surprised when you said Ollie Sayle was the first choice All Whites goalkeeper, just based on what's happened over the past kind of 12 months, because Wellington Phoenix defense hasn't been, it hasn't been Warriors defense. It definitely wasn't Breakers defense either last season. Just fantasize here about your attacking combinations. Like, based on the squad selected, what are you looking at as far as the attacking combinations, kind of first 11 stuff?
Well, I have been thinking about this, and I was thinking what I would like to see from the squad that we have here would be a 4-2-3-1 formation, similar to how they played in the second game against China. And I would be looking along the lines of probably Sayle in goal to start the first game. But as I say, that might be a bit of a battle across the back line. I'd be going left to right, Kakache, Tuiloma, Boxall, and probably Tim Payne, right back over Kellen Elliott. Midfield, you got Bell and Stamenic holding, and then I'd play Marco Rojas a little bit ahead of them in the central position with Matt Garbutt on one wing and either Just or McCowart on the other wing. It could go either way with that. We'll probably lean on Eli Just. I think it's slightly more established, although I do think Callum McCowart has been in much better form this season, albeit not really playing on the wing. And then I would start Max Mata up front. That's a bit of a thing, though, because you've got Ben Waine, you've got Alex Grieve, no Chris Wood, obviously. He's still out injured, but that sort of leaves the backups competing. And it might well be the case that if Chris Wood is fit and available, you might not be able to fit Ben Waine, Max Mata, and Alex Grieve all in the same squad. So there's a bit to play for future tours as well. And I think just Mata's playing the most regularly because the season is still ongoing in Ireland, and I also think he's just been in the best form of that trio over the last few months. So I'd lean on him, as well as the fact that I think his hold-up play is very good, which it's not just about scoring goals, it's about being part of the build-up and the possessions and stuff. And I think his hold-up stuff really would complement them, particularly with some speedy wingers around him. So that's how I would lean on it. But the good thing about this, and the good thing about, I mean, this is an essential part of international football. Is you gotta have options on the bench. You got to be able to change things up, not just change things up in terms of putting on fresh legs, but change things up and having guys who can come on and do something different to the guy they replaced. And if you've got Grieve and Ben Wayne and Callum McCowart and a few of these other guys sitting on the bench ready to come on after 60 minutes, that's pretty. I mean, their last game they won against China. The I can't remember. If it was, I don't think it was a winning goal. I think they might have been to go 2-0 up, and then they conceded late. But that decisive second goal was scored by Matt Garbutt coming off the bench, coming on, bringing some energy, giving them a little bit of a different look, and then scoring a crucial goal. You know, that's the kind of thing that the All Whites are suddenly getting to the point where they can do a little bit of that, depending on who they're playing, but they can do a little bit of that. It's good.
Maybe not so much against Sweden, but definitely when they roll Qatar. That is the niche cast. Big up yourself. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Churcher.